I feel honored to be here on Carl Sagan Day. I hope I could do Dr. Sagan's memory justice. He was particularly influential to me. I was not ever able to meet him in person, which is sad, but I have lots of his books and I listen to him speaking because it's important to learn from people that you know did it right. They did something very important. So you learn from those people, and I think many of us here miss him greatly and wish he had stuck around a little bit longer, but we have such a great legacy of his work, so I'm very honored to be here today. But this is my main work project. I do have a regular day job as a geologist and a policy specialist, not in Washington but in Pennsylvania. But I started the Doubtful News website in August of 2011, and basically because it was a way for me to do outreach and education, and this website and brand uses evidence and a science-based approach to critiquing certain news stories. I'm a weird news junkie. I love weird news. I love stuff about ghosts, paranormal, natural anomalies, and we'll talk about that today, and how, as a skeptical approach, I can maybe make people think about it a little bit differently. And I think it's a more interesting way of thinking about things. What's the science behind this, or what's the evidence behind this claim? So today I want to tell you about some of these stories and how they were treated in the media and by the public, and why it's important to have this skeptical viewpoint out there. And that's really one word: Google. When people Google this stuff, you want to make sure they get to this type of alternative, unfortunately it's alternative viewpoint. So here we go. Guide to being skeptical about the news. Why should we do this, and what is the goal? Well, I thought a lot about the goal before I started the website to make sure I had an idea of focus and where I wanted to go with it. And like I said, I really liked the weird news stories that were coming out in the media, but I was very disappointed in the way they were being treated by the media. It was all credulous. There was very little skeptical content in it, and often I noticed when reading the story that I knew other things about that topic that weren't being covered by the media. The history of, say, psychics or UFOs or whatever, and that was never brought into the media story. So I was interested in bringing in that thread of conversation, and this was a way for me to do that. So the goal is to provide this viewpoint on these stories to people who are interested in them. And like I said, they'll get on Google, they will search for these terms, and happily, more and more often, they're hitting my website, which I'm thrilled about that. So you get the skeptical viewpoint out there, people do take notice. Earlier this year, I decided to do a project called the Media Guide to Skepticism, because I was trying to get journalists to understand that skeptic doesn't mean climate skeptic, which is what they were associating it with. Denialism. I don't believe anything. That's not what skepticism is, and it was important for me to try to get that message out to them. Slowly but surely, maybe we're getting that out to them, but I collaborated with a number of skeptics in the field to do this document, which is also on the website. So that's part of the same project. I figured it went in really well with the website, so that was a good place for it. These are the kinds of questions I ask when I'm doing an evaluation of news stories. Did these things really happen as stated? And that's what you have to assume first. Did this really happen? There could be some problems with the eyewitness testimony, for example, or the details that are given. What information is missing? What's the source? What seems odd or wrong about this? And if you know a little bit about the background of the subject, often you can immediately spot, well, this is a mistake, or this is missing. What doesn't fit with what we know? So what people are seeing coming out about homeopathy, for example, does not jive with what we know about the world and what we know about nature, how nature works. And are there any valid alternative views? So what I do with that is I know various good sources of information. I try to grab from those sources things like science-based medicine or skeptoid, where I know that there's solid skeptical information, and include those links along with the news story that I'm critiquing, so people who are interested in it might just click on a couple more skeptical resources and find something they never even knew existed. Some of the categories we cover. I have a wide range of interests. I'm definitely, jack of all trades, but they're all about questionable claims. Alt-med, anomalies of nature. Anti-vax, we'll do stories on conspiracies. Consumer products that come out that are bogus. Cryptozoology, one of my favorites. I'm sort of a Bigfoot fanatic. Hauntings that come out in the news, especially in the past 2 weeks. We had a lot of stories that came out in the news that were very credulous. Hoaxes, UFOs, anti-science and pseudoscience, things that come out, say anti-evolution bills that are out in the legislatures around the country. Money-making schemes, oddities, just general oddities like, should you believe this thing that you've seen on the news? Paranormal, psychics, skeptical activism, which I like to highlight, and superstition pretty much around the world. So those are the type of news events I cover. I don't do investigations because that would be a bit more time than I have, but I like to deal with the news story that's in the media today that people are interested in. So one of the things we have that's special about the site is a comment policy. And this comment policy, we encourage references. We don't like anecdotes very much. We refuse to allow the proselytizing and promotion of piffle. We have chiropractors that sometimes came on the site and say, I'm different, I do this wonderful thing. Or when I did a story about faith healers, the people who had gone to that faith healer come on the site and say, you're absolutely wrong, this faith healer healed me. And we don't really allow that because they have a platform already. Now that may seem like censorship, but it's my blog. And I want to promote a positive science-based viewpoint. They can go and do whatever they want on their own site. I'm trying to make my comment policy a place where people could go to get additional information about the story, positive information. It's not a forum, it's not a debate. So that is a little bit different. Does get me into trouble sometimes because it is a bit arbitrary who I allow on and off, but they can always email me and I always answer them. So that's one of the things that's unique about our sites. You can read our comments. You don't have to ignore them. So let's get into this one of the first stories that we did. This was an early story, like right when we started. I found this in Brazil Weird News. Now right there, the source, questionable. It mentions that archaeologists found this, the left-hand side, in Russia, and they like to use the term boffins baffled, which means scientists are stumped. But in the UK they use the term boffins. That's how I know it's in the UK. So the analysis showed, according to this news source, that these were made of metal and they looked like gears. Being a geologist, I recognized immediately what they were. They're crinoid stems. They're a very, very common fossil that you find. On the right-hand side is an example of crinoid stems. Now the only difference is on the left-hand side, the sediment is a little bit finer. So it preserved those little notches around the edges, which make it look really weird. And if you didn't know what you were looking at, you'd find that pretty strange because we don't have anything that looks like this around today. But for me, it was obvious, but yet they promoted this as machine gears that they found in ancient rock. So this was a potential problem. When people would Google this, they didn't find the real answer. So I put the real answer on there, made the comparison, and with some strategic search engine optimization, using the right keywords, if people Google this, they might get to my page and find, hey, it's actually a common fossil, a crinoid stem. So let's talk about fakes that go viral. Pictures, videos, memes that go viral. They show up in every form on social media, places like LiveLeak, YouTube, Before It's News, Above Top Secret, Coast to Coast AM, places like that tend to break these stories. Those are not news sites, but you'll get them in your inbox, you'll get them in your Facebook feed, and people will love to pass these around because they're tremendously interesting. So we have things like giant birds. We see the owl up in the upper picture. and it looks like a giant owl. And I found this picture on LiveLeak, and people were saying, wow, what is that? Where was it taking? Well, there isn't much detail to go along with it. But you take a look at the picture for a few minutes and you realize they're holding this humongous bird by just like one feather on each side. Was this photoshopped? And it turns out it was photoshopped. But it was, yeah, there's a lot of things in there that people spotted, including the head was a little bit messed up. You could tell that it was pixelated, but it just didn't make sense. But most people will pass it along to their friends and family before they will question whether it's true or not. So there was this giant owl that was caught wherever. Another large bird story that went viral, there was a great video of a student-done hoax, but it looked so real. It was done in Montreal where this golden eagle swooped down in a park and picked up a baby that was just sitting in the field, and everyone started running at it, and it dropped the baby a few feet later, and the baby was okay. And everyone, it looked very real, and it was passed on, and it got in the media, and within a week we were able to find out that it actually was a digitally manipulated CGI video. Giant snakes, we get things that are done with forced perspective, makes the snake look humongous, or this snake could have been found, or this animal could have been found someplace else, but now they have it showing up in a residential neighborhood and freaking everybody out, and it gets passed along. And you know the story about the lie travels halfway around the world before the truth can get its shoes on. You know, so this is the kind of thing that we're battling. And one of the stories that I really got into and wrote a lot about, maybe you've heard about it, sky noises. There was this spate of reports, especially on YouTube, where people were hearing weird noises in the sky. And they were like trumpets or mechanical noises. They really sounded like the robot apocalypse was coming. And it turned out that a lot of these were hoaxes. And people didn't realize that they were hoaxes. They didn't realize the same exact sound had been duplicated over and over again on YouTube. But it wasn't the same sound because it was occurring all over the world. It was the same sound because people are copying the exact same sound on different YouTube videos. So I did a lot of work on that, and I found that interesting. And it's still, with the apocalypse in 2012, that went crazy. People were really actually scared of the end of the world at that point. Really good example of things that went viral was with regards to Hurricane Sandy. These pictures are fake, but they went around on Twitter and Facebook. And the first picture, this one with the giant storm coming on the Statue of Liberty, is a composite of two different pictures. So it actually is real pictures. They're just composited to make it look like doomsday was coming upon the city. And this got passed around a tremendous amount. I mean, you couldn't even count how many millions of times it showed up in different places on social media. Sharks in residential neighborhoods as it was flooding in New Jersey were big, these two showing the sharks. And people had a very emotional reaction to those pictures because there's sharks in the front yard. And they were scared. And they were already scared from the idea that this was a tremendous natural catastrophe and they weren't sure how to deal with it. But then you see these pictures that make it out to be just really catastrophic, and can we ever recover? So people pass them on without checking. Fakes that make the news. And here's a couple stories I have to explain. I love these things. And sometimes it takes us a day or two to figure out that they are faked. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer. The upper left is a closed circuit TV camera, security camera, at a drug shop in the UK, Whitstable. And if you notice, the red box right beyond that gentleman is floating in midair. And the video showed that this box came floating off the shelf and just suddenly tumbled. I didn't want to show the video because sometimes videos don't work too well on the computers, but it was obvious that something weird was going on here. When you looked at the wider view, you'd see people in the background who were all dressed in black, and they were peeking around the corners, and then they ducked back like this. But all people saw was this part of the video where it looked really, really cool, where this box came out, and it shocked the poor guy who's, the ruse in this scenario. It turns out it was fake, obviously. The right-hand side was one of my favorites, showing a mammoth crossing a river in Siberia. This ended up being in the Sun in the UK. It was exclusive to that newspaper, but the video went around. It turns out the guy who made the video was a known hoaxer. He got paid for this, and I think the Sun got their money's worth because this was viewed millions and millions of times. And it really did look like a mammoth crossing a river, except it was blurry, so you couldn't really see. And it took about a week before people realized that there actually was a video of this river. Funny, it didn't have a mammoth in it, though. He had digitally put in the mammoth and made it blurry so you couldn't see the details. Bottom here, these two are hoax apps that you can buy on your iPhone. You can create your own ghosts, you can create your own UFOs. And these ended up in the local newspapers as real. And then 2 days later, when the reporter was deluged with people saying, "What, did you not look at this? These are hoaxed." The reporter eventually did retract the story and say, "Oh, this was a mistake." You can see the ghost app, this one right here. Here's the ghostly chair right here. And in some cases, people were fooled. They were given these pictures and say, look, this is what I caught in your house. And the poor people sent it to the newspaper without knowing that they were being duped. So it was kind of sad. Same thing with the UFOs. Obviously, this is not real, but the story behind it was he saw these lights moving over the house. No, he didn't. He just clicked the app button and inserted them in the picture. This was a huge story. Fake bomb detectors. A UK businessman named James McCormick were selling these devices to government officials all over the world at security checkpoints. They have names like the GT200, the ADE 651, the Quadro Tracker. They were supposed to test for explosives in cars at checkpoints. They were tested by MIT. They were found to be dowsing rods, completely ineffective, run by the ideomotor effect that you use for dowsing rods. They just, people, if the checkpoint person thought you looked suspicious, the thing would move, pull over.
What was the name of that effect?
Ideomotor effect. Mm-hmm. Same thing with dowsing rods, where you don't even realize you're making that little movement with your hand. That's what these devices were. They were also manufactured to detect anything you want: water, drugs, ammunition, all sorts of things. But the problem that they were being used at checkpoints in places like Iraq and in Mexico, they obviously caused death. There were bombs that got through these checkpoints because this was the piece of crap they were relying on. It turned out that there were others involved. Skeptical activism really played a part in getting these things down. People like James Randi. Hal Bidlack was part of the military establishment who helped get attention paid to these. Professor Bruce Hood in the UK, these were being manufactured down the street from him. He called up the guy and said, "I'd like some more information," and was instrumental in getting the BBC to get in there and expose Jim McCormick as a fraud. He was put on trial and he was sent to jail. Along with him, his colleague that he had worked with, a man named Bolton, split off and started making his own devices because it was very lucrative. They were selling to these governments and there was bribes involved, and they were selling these for ridiculous amounts of money. They were a piece of plastic and metal. They were selling them for thousands of dollars a piece. They were making a mint. These devices are still being used, even though both men are in jail. As far as I know, they were still being used in a couple countries. I think Thailand was still using them, and it was still questionable in Iraq because people believe they really do work. They don't understand that they do not. So the more that we bring out these stories to the general public, the more that they can understand and put pressure on certain officials to look a bit more carefully before spending money on devices that are simply too good to be true. We do an awful lot on alternate med, and there's so many things with regards to alternative medicine. We've got homeopathy. Dietary supplements have been big in the news lately because they don't contain what they're supposed to contain, or they contain stuff they're not supposed to contain. They contain allergens, potentially. They may have wheat or different types of pollen in them that they're not supposed to contain. People are allergic to that. They're not listed on the label. The American public does not understand, and it's not of no fault of their own, they do not understand that these types of drugs are not regulated the same as your over-the-counter drugs or your prescription drugs. They are given a pass because of a law that allows them to be given a pass. So they're sold with these empty promises, labeled just so they don't get into legal trouble. And these products are out there, and most of them are completely useless and potentially harmful. Then you have things like Ayurvedic medicine and natural remedies and chiropractic. And traditional Chinese medicine is becoming very big, not only here, but also it's really being pushed in China as an alternative to real medicine. And that does result in certain animals being used to produce these products. And obviously, many people are aware of the plight of the rhino. The rhinos are being poached at a ridiculous rate. They will die off. Other things like tigers, large cats are also taken. So it relates to a poaching problem as well as import problems in other countries where they're using animals to produce these traditional Chinese medicines, and also products that are just economically questionable. So we try to bring those stories to light to remind people, if they do Google these products, they're interested, maybe they can get to a page that reminds them that, number one, they don't work, number two, they could be dangerous, number three, you may be killing an animal you actually like. So think about choosing these medicines. One of my favorite subjects, strange animal sightings. I love mystery carcasses. And I've always loved pictures like this one that looks like a sea serpent. This showed up in Spain earlier this year. And it had horns. If you notice on the top, there's these horns that were left over. And it looks like a sea serpent. And people automatically look at it. They've never seen anything like it. It looks like a sea serpent. That gets in the news. It goes all over the place. Well, just like in that middle picture there, which happens to be not a chupacabra, but a dog, we're not used to seeing things in a decomposed state. And we're confused by them when we see this. They don't have hair. They don't have fur. They don't have the parts that they normally have when we see them when they're alive. So they look really weird. They get in the local news. And nobody ever thinks to ask a zoologist or the local professor what they think they could be. And strangely, nobody ever gets good pictures of them either. Always take a picture of the teeth and the feet. Always take a picture of the teeth and the feet. You can make identification from those things. If you ever come across a mystery carcass washed up on the beach and it really stinks and you don't want to take a piece of it, which usually is the case, and never poke a dead animal. Number one rule, don't ever do that because they do explode. Then we had, a couple weeks ago, two oarfish washed up in California. Again, sea serpent-like. Nobody's ever seen these things. I guess, when I was a kid, I had the Encyclopedia of Animals, and I had the big wildlife treasury of cards of animals. So I've seen all sorts of animals, and I knew that was an oarfish. Most people do not know that there are deep sea fishes that look like that look anything like that. So they're kind of surprised when these things wash up on shore, and they think there's some kind of mutant or monster. Speaking of mutants, that one in the poor dog-like thing in the middle, I forget what state that was in. It was one of the Northeast states here that they photographed that animal. He's hairless. He's really pathetic looking. He's eating some dog chow that somebody left out for him there. They call him a chupacabra. Any hairless thing anymore gets called a chupacabra, which is a mystery creature from Latin America. Turned out to be a myth, but for some reason it ended up being given the label of anything that is sort of canine looking and hairless is now called a chupacabra. That is either a coyote or a fox that has a severe case of mange. He's very sick, he's very pathetic, and he will come out in the daytime and to human habitations just to find something easy to eat because he can't catch food on his own. But that comes across as a story in the news, chupacabra sighting. This is a serval cat mix that was roaming the streets of Detroit. Obviously, it's too big to be a house cat, and it kind of freaked people out. They were able to get decent pictures of it, and they were a bit nervous with the kids walking around that there's this wild cat walking the streets of Detroit. Usually you don't get these kind of pictures for big cats. People say, oh, there's a black panther coming in my backyard. Like you see that one over there, the black panther caught by the game cam, supposedly in Texas, which turned out to be Africa, which is not anywhere close to Texas. Thanks, Facebook, for, allowing these pictures to come up. Look, this was caught in Texas. No, actually, Google image search is great because then I could find that was actually taken in Africa. But that cat was real. The serval cat was real. It was a mix of a domestic cat and a serval cat, an actual African wildcat. And unfortunately, he was shot. But there are occasionally some weird creatures that do enter your neighborhood. People want to think that there's some radioactivity, or they're eating landfill garbage, or they're doing something terrible. But really, they're just a sick animal, or they're lost, or they're escaped, or something like that. Natural anomalies, we love to point these out basically because I adore them. I love natural anomalies. I think that the world is a fantastic place. We don't have to make stuff up because we get weird stuff as it is, all natural. Two-headed pigs, get a lot of two-headed livestock. Sometimes they don't live, but when they do live, the villagers, this is probably in China because it happens quite a lot where the news comes out of China, the villagers either take it as a bad sign or they take it as a sign of good luck. And they try to keep the animal, or they'll kill it. It's becoming more and more taken as a positive sign because they get some nice press from this. You know, they got the two-headed pig, and people come and they don't kill it. They get more money if they keep it alive and charge people. Natural anomalies, the Chelyabinsk meteor was really cool, and the after effects of that were really neat. We don't normally get to see stuff like that. But was it shot down by a UFO? I don't think so. The beautiful translucent clouds from ice crystals there, I like to bring those pictures up simply because people think they're fake, but they're real. We have about 5 or 6 different colored lobster stories on our site. Lobsters come in all neat colors. They come in blue, they come half and half. We had a Halloween lobster one time. He was half black, half orange. Sometimes they're all orange, sometimes they're albinos. They're really great things, so we'd like to point out freaky lobsters. There were, I think, 4 or 5 alligators found in Pennsylvania this past summer. Girl goes out to her wood pile behind the shed. Little girl, she runs back in the house. Daddy, there's an alligator by the wood pile. And he's like, okay, really? He goes out there, there's a damn alligator on the wood pile, and they don't know how I got there. That happened more than once in Pennsylvania last year. Alligators do not survive in Pennsylvania. They're not native. They've escaped. This one was rather large. He was a couple feet long. I think he was like 2 feet long. Can be potentially dangerous. And again, another chupacabra. That one was in Mississippi, I think. Again, we'll put the story, I'll find the story via keywords. I'll put it on the website. Within a week, it'll be all over the national news. People will pick it up from other sources, and they'll still be calling it a chupacabra. And I'll have the answer right there on the webpage. It's not chupacabra, it's a mangy coyote. Nope, it's a chupacabra because that gets the eyeballs. Pareidolia, fun stuff. Okay, it's always Jesus, right? It's always Jesus that people see. This is a ray, a fish that's very flattened. And this woman found this on the beach, and she looked at it, and it's Jesus. So she took a picture. So I posted it up on Doubtful News, and we had opened it up to discussion. Who is it? Oh, it's George Harrison. It's Charles Manson. We had a whole pile of people. It was one of the Doobie Brothers, I thought, and it could be anybody because all we see is the facial features of a bearded guy with long hair. The angel cloud that appeared over Florida after a hurricane had passed through. People took that as a sign. This, to me, the middle guy looks like a guy juggling balls of fire. No, it was Jesus. It was Jesus in the bleach stain. Sometimes they don't look like Jesus, they look like Cookie Monster. I thought that sea sponge was fantastic, and I really loved it. A big thing this year was people taking the Mars rover pictures and zooming in on funny-looking rocks and discovering that there were rats, iguanas, platypus, all sorts of neat things living on Mars. So there's the rat from Mars. Fun stuff, but it just goes to show you that, yeah.
Now, I heard that there was one that looks like a face there that looks like Mickey Mouse.
Oh, the Mickey Mouse face on Mars. There's been so many things that have showed up in the Martian landscape because we're just looking for those patterns. And people were looking for these patterns. So putting these stories up, we'll get the hits, but then you can actually explain to people it's a concept called Pareidolia where you're looking for these patterns. And maybe they believe you and maybe they don't. But it's a chance to get that word out there. And so those kind of pictures are a real good way to get people to your website. So these next two slides are about Animal Planet, who I'm very mad at. They did actually three. They did this show about mermaids where they used CGI animation to produce these mermaids, very realistic, very beautiful. And then they used government-sounding titles for actors that were portraying themselves as scientists. So they made it look like it was a real documentary, that they were actual scientists talking about their experience with mermaids. They actually used an antiquated, discarded theory called the aquatic ape hypothesis, that there was this ape that developed in the water, that we came from a line of apes that developed ability to live in water, completely discarded. But yet it sounded just sciencey enough for so many people who watched this show to believe that this was real, to the point where they went to the National Organization for Oceanic and Atmospheric, NOAA, and NOAA had to put a disclaimer on their website saying, really, there isn't any mermaids. That was a mockumentary. It was not real. It's sad in this day and age that people would actually think that, but the fact that Animal Planet put their disclaimer like really, really small or at the very end, people missed it. And they're used to going to Animal Planet, Discovery Channel, Science Channel as sources of nonfiction, as sources of fact. And to me, I felt like Animal Planet had duped the public by doing this. But they got blockbuster ratings from this show, so they made a sequel. And then they made Megalodon, giant shark, because ratings, you know. And the Megalodon is a real animal. It's an extinct shark. It died out at least 1.5 million years ago. It looks like a great white, has the same sort of ecological niche, eats very large things, bigger than a boat, biggest vertebrate animal that in the sea, a predator in the sea. So it really was huge. It really was scary, but it's extinct. Animal Planet tried to make you believe that maybe it wasn't extinct. Maybe there really is Jaws out there. And I thought that was also very disingenuous and not in line with what their mission should be, to provide people with accurate information. Instead, they promoted this myth. And I really felt sort of offended by the fact that they used tiny kernels of real science and then speculation made the entire program. So they used CGI. They used scientists saying, look at what I saw, and it looks, can you tell if it's real or not? If you don't look into it, if you're just watching it as you're flipping through channels, you think it's a real gigantic 50-foot shark. Also got great ratings. But it was actually also good that scientists really railed on Animal Planet, especially after this Megalodon special. Shark specialists railed on Animal Planet because they're trying to protect sharks. Sharks are important to our oceanic ecosystem and diversity. And shows like this that just make people afraid of giant sharks out there really did not help the scientists who are trying to do good work to protect sharks and ocean diversity. Hauntings and ghost hunters. This was a big year for ghost hunters, I think. They're always popular, but I think there was a resurgence this year because of the movie The Conjuring, which highlighted the work of Ed and Lorraine Warren. They were very religious, and they were self-titled demonologists. Their claim to fame was that they did an investigation at the Amityville house, and they produced this famous picture of what is the Amityville ghost boy. And about 2 years ago, they came out with a couple explanations that this was actually just one of the kids that was on site, their nephew, and that's a reflection of his glasses. And when you look at it, it's obviously a reflection of his glasses. And it looks an awful lot like one of the production people that was there, a young man, probably in his 20s. He looks different there, and you project something on there because you want to see a ghost boy. And a lot of people have spun off of the Warrens and continue to do the same demonology thing. Demons are a big deal right now. People want exorcisms. They say they have demons in their houses. It's amazing. But we also get things like the ghost photos. Oh, I took this picture and then I got home and there was this woman. I noticed this woman in white in this photo. Yeah, right. That's a Photoshop. She doesn't match the rest of the scenery. She could be ghost. That's why she doesn't match the rest of the scenery. But let's be a little bit more scientific about that. You need more evidence than just a picture to say that ghost exists. Closed caption security cameras, or closed circuit security cameras in businesses have been a boon to ghost hunters because they show these blobby blobs just floating around sometimes because an insect or something gets on the lens of the camera and looks blurry, but it's a ghost. Those have been happening an awful lot. And even though how many times people have debunked it and said it's a ghost or it's a bug or a piece of fluff that passes the screen, they want to believe that it's a ghost. And it gets on the news. This was a very disturbing topic. February of 2013 in Oklahoma, there was a man who was discovered in his home dead, just burnt to pieces. Literally, there was not much left of him except his extremities. And the house was still standing and fine. You couldn't tell that there had been a fire. When the sheriff went in and saw this man burnt to death, he said, it could be a case of spontaneous human combustion because he'd seen other bodies that looked like that and they were labeled spontaneous human combustion. There is no such thing as spontaneous human combustion. It turned out that that guy got on all sorts of news outlets that was promoted for weeks where he considered that to be an option. This man spontaneously combusted despite the fact that he was a heavy smoker and an alcoholic and in very poor health. It turned out a couple months later, they actually did find out he died of a heart attack and fell on a cigarette, and he was too drunk to, call for help or do anything. That's the way he died. But what do people remember? Spontaneous human combustion. This is baby Raul. He was 3 months old, brought into an Indian hospital. His family said he had burst into flames 4 times. He's 3 months old. He's not burst into flames. Immediately when I saw this picture, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, child abuse. Somebody is burning this child. The hospital thought, we'll test him to see if he spontaneously combusts. We'll take blood samples and all sorts of, do gas chemistry on his blood and his intestinal gases and monitor him and see if he burst. Did he burst into flames in the hospital? No. Right before he was about to be released, some of the hospital administrators did go to the local officials and say, we do need to investigate this for child abuse. However, they did find one hint. The mother's village had a problem with phosphorus. Phosphorus will spontaneously combust. In nature, if it dries out, certain types of phosphorus, white phosphorus, will combust. It can appear, because it's used as a fertilizer, it may appear in this case, it was goat dung that was used in the local huts, and it did ignite and cause the huts to burn down. As we'll see in the next story, phosphorus can be found in other places. But there was a connection, and it is possible that the baby had some sort of contact with the phosphorus and had burst into flames. I can't see how it wasn't deliberate that this phosphorus was placed on the baby, maybe even by accident. I don't know. But because it's come out of India, can't really follow if it's been solved or not. A real case of spontaneous combustion was this woman walking along a beach in San Onofre, California, and she picks up these rocks and she puts them in her pocket, and they were wet when she picked them up. She says, they're really strange. They have this gold, yellowish stuff on them. She puts them in her pocket of her shorts. She goes home. By the time she gets to her kitchen, her shorts burst into flames, and she receives burns on her torso and legs. And she's taken to the hospital, and as she pulls out the rocks from her pocket and throws them on the kitchen floor, they're burning. The officials go to the beach, Trestles Beach, and they look for more of these rocks. They can't find any. They take the rocks and they test them, and eventually it does come out that is phosphorus contained on the rocks. As the phosphorus dried out, in contact with oxygen, it combusted. And if anybody has military experience, you know that you will use white phosphorus as smoke screens and in munitions, and it also is used in undetonated fireworks. You will find it. Well, turns out that the beach was pretty close to Camp Pendleton, and it is suspected that at one point there may have been some dumping offshore, or there were some ordinances that were just left there on the beach, and they eventually disintegrated. And somehow they made it onto these 2 rocks that made it up onto the beach. I had since found one other story of this happening in South America where the same thing happened. Some rocks came up on the beach that were coated in phosphorus that did combust. So it was definitely a man-made issue. This doesn't occur in nature. And then the report was covered up. The report was not made public by Camp Pendleton, who did investigate this case. They didn't want anybody to know where this had come up. But the woman is okay. She did recover, and she's fine. I do a lot on Bigfoot, and this is a huge year for Bigfoot, and I know people laugh at me for doing Bigfoot, but I'll tell you why I talk about Bigfoot. Finding Bigfoot is also on Animal Planet. It's probably the show I hate the most on television because they pretend to be scientists, and they're not. And what they do is not science, except they want you to think of them as scientists because it looks credible. The three, 4 men in the picture up above that, the middle man there with glasses actually is a scientist. That's Dr. Brian Sykes, and he's out of Oxford University. And he actually came over to the U.S. and collected samples from these people who said that they had hair and blood from potential Bigfoot. So he took the samples back. He also studied samples in the Himalayas and in Russia, where there were reports of hairy hominids there as well. And he ended up doing actual science on it and found that none of the samples from the U.S. contained any Sasquatch. They were bear, they were raccoon, they were whatever, deer, whatever. The Himalayan samples contained a very unique bear signature, one that he hadn't seen before. And it may signal that there's a hybrid bear there, a polar bear, brown bear, that they hadn't known about, which could account for reports of the Yeti. So there actually was science done in the name of Bigfoot. The woman on the bottom, Dr. Melba Ketchum, she's a creationist, more or less. She believes that the Bible is a literal truth. And she collected a pile of Bigfoot samples, supposed Bigfoot samples, in the U.S. And she came up with a signature, and she registered a name and said that Bigfoot was a hybrid of a human and an unknown ape. Long time ago, and she was able to pinpoint when the date was. Well, there wasn't one scientist, credible scientist, who came out and validated her results because they were so bad. She published in her own self-owned journal. It was a complete joke, but yet to this day she still insists that the sequences do not fit into the evolutionary record. More like the Himalayan bear, you can tell where it fits in the evolutionary record. You can tell what it's related to. Ketchum samples aren't related to anything. They look like lemur and human and everything, so they didn't make sense in terms of what we already know. So it was important for me to bring that out to the public, that what you're looking at is ridiculous science, fake science, and this is how real science works.
What's her doctorate in?
She is a doctor of veterinary medicine. She is not a PhD. She did forensic genetic work. So she's pinpointing dog breeds and cat breeds and things like that. And at the same time where she made her wonderful announcement of I have proof of Bigfoot DNA, this video on the left came out, which looks remarkably like Chewbacca from Star Wars. And we were supposed to believe that that was real. So that's why I spent a lot of time on Bigfoot. And because it's a really popular subject, it is a good way for me to talk to people. I'm not really... I'm not beloved by the Bigfoot community, though. Although I am still able to go on some of their like podcasts and websites and stuff and have conversations with them. So it's not all animosity. I think they realize I really want to know the answer. They really want to find proof of Bigfoot. I really want to know the answer to what people saw. It's not the same question. They already have a pre-existing belief that this creature is out there. They're knowers. They know it because they've seen it. There was also a Loch Ness hoax, and this was really, really interesting. Again, a stupid subject people want to discard. But in the background was one guy, George Edwards, who took this picture in August of 2012, and he insists that this is the best, I don't have my slide there, this was the best picture of Nessie ever taken. He runs a cruise business on Loch Ness. He ferries people around looking for the monster. And problems with that picture was, I don't know what it is. It doesn't look like it's swimming. You had to get Urquhart Castle in the background there to show you that it was Loch Ness. So this looks obviously staged. He promoted the picture on postcards that he was selling. He said that he sent this picture to be authenticated to the U.S. military. I don't know why the U.S. military would care what's in Loch Ness, but it added a sense of credibility to the picture. A local Loch Ness researcher that ran a visitor center or another tour, who was also looking into the creature, said, "Gosh, that looks awful familiar." And he pulled out the old pictures of this prop that was used in a National Geographic special of a hump that was pulled by George Edwards' boat to film for National Geographic. So Edwards had access to this prop, took this picture, and was promoting it as a real creature. When he was exposed as a hoax, he said, "So what, I'm having a bit of fun." He got on the case of the local research center because they were calling the Loch Ness Monster perhaps a giant eel or a rogue, wave formation. He's like, or a giant fish. Who's going to come to Loch Ness if there's no monster? Who's going to come to see a wave? They want to see a monster. I'm going to give them a monster. So this is the whole idea of paranormal tourism. Can we get people to come to our site by enhancing the legend and the myth? And some of us have a problem with that. I'd love to go to Loch Ness for other reasons, but the fact that it does have a legend doesn't take away from the beauty of the place. It adds to it, but it's a legend. It's not really a creature. And the reports of the creature have a lot of different explanations, not just one. So those are the kind of things that I'm interested in. Edward's unrepentant. He's fighting with the Loch Ness Visitor Center, and it's really a mess. But it highlights another aspect of human nature. You just don't think about these things. Extraterrestrials, real quick, it was a weird year for extraterrestrials. Antonio Paris was just in the background. He just had to step out because he was going to another engagement. But he is one of the researchers that is looking into what people are actually seeing in the sky. Ufology right now is weird things that we can find that we can say are aliens, which is, again, a completely different question. So we get stories about this alien creature came out of the Atacama Desert. It's suspected that may be a mummified fetus. We had stories about, even Melba Ketchum was interested in these elongated skulls. A mass grave site was found in Mexico. I believe it was Mexico. Yeah. And they look like alien skulls. Well, people didn't know that at one time people would bind their heads with wrapping and wood pieces to make their skulls elongate. It was a form of expression and status symbol. And that's what was with these people here. The bottom is a hoax, or not a hoax photograph. It's a photograph. I can't really explain what it is, but it could be just like a vehicle going by. But it was claimed to be a UFO landing. And disclosure was a huge thing. They were petitioning the U.S. government to disclose what you know about UFOs. They've already done that. What they know is no more than what we can all find out about them, that people make mistakes in what they see. So last two slides I have here are good news. There were some wins this year. Kevin Trudeau, the serial consumer horror, he's constantly in trouble with the federal government because of what he says is true and really is not. He declared bankruptcy in order to avoid paying the fines and fees back to the people that he scammed. And he was in and out of jail. Eventually he got out of jail because he told the judge, look, I don't have any more assets. The judge said, I think you're lying because that's your profession, more or less. And the judge had nothing to hold him on. But the good thing is that Kevin Trudeau is facing a criminal trial coming up. So hopefully he does get his.
I don't know who he is.
Kevin Trudeau is an infomercial person. He's always on infomercials. He's always selling books, like he sold something called coral calcium, which was supposed to be the cure-all for everything, even cancer. And he would go on these infomercials and he would sell his products. He had a series of what the doctors don't want you to know about, or doesn't want you to know about diet or weight loss, or so these miracle cures. And when you read the book, you found out that the cure wasn't in the book. It was in you had to pay him, and you would give him he would give you access to the secret. So he was always in trouble with the FCC and the consumer bureaus. On the other end of the spectrum, Rose Marks. The Marks family, Marks psychic family, operated across the country. They are a Romani family, so they're considered, in the vernacular, gypsies. And as part of their family tradition, the women did not go to school much beyond lower grades, and they were trained to be fortune tellers and psychics. And if you notice the upper picture there, where that's like Rose Marks in the middle, her sister beside her, and her daughter in front of her, they all got the ankle monitors because they're all in trouble. What they do is they would change their names, they would give a different name, they would start up this psychic business, and they would say to these rich people, you have a curse, your money's cursed, your jewels are cursed, give us it, we'll take the curse away, and whenever you want, we'll give them back to you, as long as you're happy with our service. And these people just kept giving them money, giving them stuff. At one point, Rose Marks told the woman that her valuables had been burned in the 9/11 attacks, so she couldn't give it back to her. She extorted $17 million from a romance novelist, Jude Devereaux, by saying that she was communicating with Colin Powell and Brad Pitt and giving her ideas for her novels. Really, really crazy stuff. But this poor woman, who was in a desperate state because her life was falling apart at the time as well, was dependent upon Rose Marks to give her sort of a life coaching advice to help her get through these times. And Rose was doing that for her. However, she was also taking her money. So the Markses tend to do that. They masquerade as life coaches while they're taking your money and telling you that they're removing your curses. And I was afraid when the jury would look at this Rose Marks case that they would see her as sort of providing a service, and the money was then wasn't taken from her, but it was freely given to Rose Marks. Turns out the jury didn't fall for that. They sent her to prison. She was guilty on all counts. And finally, I like to highlight some heroes on the site. And both of these men are from India. Neither one of them are in India anymore, unfortunately. Sanal Idamarku I had the pleasure of meeting him at TAM, and it was wonderful. Randy walked up to him and says, "You are my hero." Sanal discovered in an Indian church that an icon was supposedly weeping. Turned out to be a fraud, and he pointed it out. It was a fraud, and they went to his house and tried to arrest him for blasphemy. And the church was obviously making some money and looking good off this relic. He exposed it as a fake. He was run out of town in order to prevent from being arrested. And he is now living sort of in exile, but he was able to come to America, and he follows things that are going on in India. India has a huge superstition problem. They rely on their gurus. The gurus have infiltrated the government officials and influenced them. And when Narendra Dabolkar was pressing with the Indian Rationalist Association, was pressing for anti-superstition laws in his state, in India, that meant that you would be charged or put in jail for attempting to tell people they're cursed, give me money, I'll take your curse away, selling charms and medicines that are magic or whatever. It would make those activities illegal. Dabolkar was killed. He was assassinated. And not long after, thankfully, his anti-superstition law was passed in his state, and other states in India are also pursuing the same sort of laws. So far to go in India, but amazing that these men put their lives at risk to bring rationality to their societies. So those are the kinds of things that I cover at Doubtful News. It's pretty much a two-person operation. There's stuff out almost every day. Not today because I'm kind of busy, but I do look at news feeds, and it's a good way to find the important news stories, so you don't have to go looking through a pile of other stuff. I do that for you. I look for the good news stories that maybe have a message that I can use to promote rationality or scientific thinking, or get people thinking about this subject in a different way, which is what I'm trying to do. So to me, I want the real story. I don't want the mystery. I don't want the myth. I don't want the garbage that the media would put out just to get eyeballs on it. I want to know what's really going on. So if you could do me a favor, visit the site, and if you hear somebody talking about a weird story, see if we've covered it, send them the link. And send them over to our site, and remember that the public is the audience. I'm preaching to the choir here, but the audience is the public, the people who are just searching these out on Google, and let's give them a taste of some skepticism. So, thank you. Yeah.
Have you looked at chemtrails?
Chemtrails don't often make the news, but I often get people asking me about them because they'll find them in forums and stuff. They'll be curious about them. But what I try to do is stick to the stories that are in the news media so I can counter that. So it's more like a news critique site. I'd love to do investigations and do more stories on that. And I do write for Skeptical Inquirer and other places. So I can look into those in that aspect. But I try to keep the news site just to the news stories. Yeah.
Have you had any examples of something you thought were initially skeptical about, but you found out they were actually real?
Sure, lots of things. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I like to point out those natural anomalies, because you look at those things like the two-faced kitten or the six-legged cow, and you're like, is this a Photoshop or is this something really weird? Oh, you know what? I never told you what that sea serpent body thing was. It wasn't a sea serpent. It was actually the remains of a basking shark. And what happens with sharks is it's not a Photoshop, it's a real thing. The pieces just have fallen off in a way that makes the one remaining backbone all that's left. And people think it's some sort of sea serpent, but it's really a shark. Nobody would ever think it was a shark, but that's the way they decompose. So some of these weird things actually are real, and that's more important to get to the real answer than to maintain the mystery. Oh, just recently, there was a thing about Brazilian wandering spiders being on bananas. They're one of the most deadly spiders, and I thought that's an urban legend. Turns out it's real. These Brazilian wandering spiders actually do get on bananas. They do get transported to other countries like the UK, and this poor woman finds this batch of spiders in her bananas. They had to get them out of the house and exterminate the house, because these are actually deadly spiders that do come on bananas from Brazil.
I do not like bananas.
Yeah.
How is it that we're a small group here, virtually a marginalized minority, and the superstition is the mainstream thing? When I was a little kid, I was taught to despise superstition, and that lasted until about the age of 10 in the early 60s. And then as I became a teenager, I found superstition was the cutting edge thing. When I went to college, I was taught in the history and philosophy of science. Tomkin was the head of the department there. That superstition and science are all intermeshed, and there's no dividing line in religions. It's all the same thing. How is it that superstition has become the mainstream and we've become marginalized?
I was looking at this relatively recently. It's very much a wave of popularity as things go up and down. What happened, like the New Age ideas hit, and then the weird stuff comes back to the forefront again, and then that wanes for a little while because maybe we've got economic conditions or are good and we don't have to rely on superstition. But you especially see this with other countries. When they're in a poverty state or a bad economic condition, people rely on superstition more because it feels like a sense of control. So in bad economic times, business especially, they're running to psychics to tell them what stocks to buy. Or using them as life coaches because they want this sense of control that they can't get any other way. And it's a false sense of control, But it's a sense of control that makes them feel better. So I think it really, really runs in waves. Yeah.
Have you studied much about the Amityville phenomenon?
I did. I did study a little bit about that. It's a hoax. I mean, everyone knows it's a hoax. And no, it's a fraud. Yeah, it is a fraud. That's true. I shouldn't say that everybody knows that it's a hoax. Everybody in here knows it's a hoax. Everybody out there thinks it's real and thinks it's demons. And it was a very effective look at how pop culture can influence people to believe things that aren't real. And I think we've also seen that with regards to monsters. There's certain movies that come out that influence people to start seeing real monsters around them. Now there's internet monsters that have been created whole cloth on the internet, just as a story. People are seeing them in real life. I think with Amityville, it's such a good story. It came out at such a perfect time, and it's an iconic bit of American folklore that it's never going to go away. There's always going to be someone who believes in it. And I like when they go to the house now, and the woman who lives there saying, you know, they say that these windows were ripped off their hinges. Look, these are the original hinges right here of this house. It was never ripped off the hinges. Yeah.
What is your background? Are you a scientist? Or?
I have a degree in geology, so I'm a geoscientist, but I also have a master's degree in science in the public. It's an education degree. So that's really my focus. I'm not out in the field drilling wells. I don't really like to do that. But so right now I do, which is I think is a good thing, is to have a scientist writing regulation, which is what I do. I do write regulation from the state of Pennsylvania.
You're associated with this organization called Science and Public Interest?
No. No, I'm familiar with them, but yeah, I'm not associated with them. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
So you had the story about the stuff in India and the guy making legislation for you.
Yeah.
And obviously you're writing legislation yourself. Is that the way to go? I kind of go, people are going to believe and people are going to do what people are going to believe and what they're going to do. We can't legislate.
That's a great point. And it comes up especially with regards to faith healing in this country. Because unless you can go around telling people until you're blue in the face, don't do this. Unless they have an impetus not to do it, they will continue to do it. So in this country, there are some communities who rely on faith healing, and their children are dying. And they're dying of preventable illnesses. Those parents are now being tried and thrown in jail as examples of this will happen to you if you do not follow the law. Is that the child's rights trump your religious rights. And until we make an example by using the law of those things are not acceptable in our society, I think that's the way to move forward. So I think in some cases that is the way to move forward. You have to do the law. Otherwise, people won't voluntarily comply. They'll just continue to get away with it.
But I grew up in a faith tradition.
In a what tradition?
A faith.
A faith tradition where it never banned any medical interventions or anything like that. But there was a lot of healing that went on, and just. I had a great niece who was born in the middle of a prematureness. They had to stop and give a blessing before, rushing off into the ICU, into an ICU. So it's still going to be
right. But
I mean, I think
what we have to do is cut back on the extreme examples of that. And it's really, really hard to write a law that's going to cover all the what ifs. Extremely difficult. We try to do it all the time, and we always find out somebody has found the loophole. But it's a start, and then you start that law, and it does affect the way people behave. So, yeah.
Have you done any research on this multiple vaccinations for preschoolers?
I am aware of that. I actually just finished, well, I got to finish it when I go home tomorrow, a Coursera course on vaccines given by Dr. Paul Offit. And in that, he explains the theory behind spacing out the vaccinations as opposed to giving them all at once, which is currently recommended. And that was a great resource for me. Dr. Paul Offit I could listen to him all day. He explained why spreading shots out is a bad idea, and what I learned so much about the history of vaccination. I would urge every parent to read his books and understand vaccinations. But when I find stories like that, like measles epidemic going on in Wales right now, I try to put that on the site to show this. There's a reason why we get vaccinations. It's one of the most effective public health measures, if not the most effective public health measure we've ever come up with as a human society. We need to not abuse it. We need to use it.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.